to have Ryan as our guest today, and Ash. I'm going to hand the microphone over to you and let you guys get going. We ask all attendees to send in questions. This event will take about 30 minutes, 35, 40 minutes maybe. Be time for some questions at the end as well. So thanks everybody for joining us. Ash, Ryan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Tony. Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us in this discussion today. We're going to try and have a bit of a dialogue between me and Ryan. Both of us, have a very interesting set of opinions and experience as far as digital transformation projects are concerned. And we have been working together for several years now, and we of course share a lot of ideas as well. And I want to give a special thanks to Ryan for agreeing to come and join us on the webinar series here. Ryan has a particularly interesting set of experiences because though he comes from years of experience with software and software architecture and digital business in general, his most recent experience in company.com is almost like a complete turnover of a traditional organization with traditional and legacy technologies into a completely new architecture, which is the best practices in all digital transformation technologies that he's used. And so he's got a great set of experiences behind him, and I'm sure he's going to provide some very interesting perspectives today. What we're going to cover in today's discussion is specifically de-risking the journey to building a digital platform. And we'll make it a little more of a Q&A between me and Ryan, and I'm going to try and pick Ryan's brains and hopefully add some perspectives of mine as well. And we'll try and cover, from a high level, the sort of what are the strategies behind digital transformation, and quickly drill down into a platform approach and a platform strategy, and what is it that we can do to de-risk building such digital platform. So Ryan, maybe we do a short introduction. If you can do a short introduction, if you don't mind, of yourself, and then we can drill down straight into some questions that I can ask you, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about. And, over the last probably decade or so, I found myself in a lot of digital transformations and having the opportunity to be a part of a lot of amazing organizations that are right where, everybody tend to be right now, which is that, digital transformation, platformizing, how do you take legacy technology and a lot of legacy business practices and modernize them. And so, Ash and team at Accion have been great partners in that journey. And so, rather than being a lot of, long-winded about me, let's go ahead and dive in. I think we got a lot to cover. So, a lot of excitement.
Absolutely. So Ryan, maybe we start with, if you can start giving us a little bit of a global context in, what does digital transformation do for us? The current generation, we have gone through, I guess, several iterations of technology revolutions. And what is so special about digital transformation today? Can you throw some little bit perspective on the historical perspective and give us an idea about why?
Yeah, great. Yeah, and it's a perfect place to start. The history of mankind is about 40,000 years old. And, we've had three major turning points where technology opened up new areas of rapid growth and innovation. So you had the agricultural revolution with farming and hunting, and it allowed people to create towns and build a sense of community. Industrial revolution was assembly lines, mass production. Information age, it's all about telecommunications, computers, the internet. And honestly, myself and a lot of people believe that we're on the precipice of that fourth turning point. And really, it's on par with the top three that we just mentioned. It may take 10 to 20 years for us to fully realize it. But we're there, from artificial intelligence with deep neural networks and machine learning to IoT and augmented reality, distributed ledgers, serverless architecture. You know, all these companies that, you know, you consider digital natives that are coming out now are focused on leveraging technology to really improve the human experience. And so a lot of what we're going to talk today, you know, about today is human experience and some of those areas in digital transformation. You know, we'll talk about technology, but it's bigger than that. And in fact, human experience is going to become the true north for digital transformation. And when used effectively, it's going to be able to augment, you know, technology, and you know that technology will augment humans rather than replacing them. It's a really interesting statistic. I think it's that 80% of you know, everything that enterprises do today could and should be replaced with AI. It's a little bit of a shocking and hyperbolic thing for people to say, but it's true. And the interesting thing with that means there's that 20% gap is all about humans. It's about providing, you know, the empathy and the critical thinking to support all of the, you know, this amazing technology that's able to kind of improve that human experience. So there's a ton from a risk perspective that goes into reskilling employees and all the things that as technologists we don't necessarily, you know, they're not as top of mind. And you know, the really interesting thing about that when we think about it is, you know, what does that mean? If we're moving into a new era, are we late to the boat? We've been talking about digital transformation for years now, and in technology terms, that might as well be decades, right? Technology moves fast, but the really interesting thing when you think about it is we are truly at the beginning. If you take Amazon.com, who do, you know, e-commerce and distribution of products. In the US, it's like 80% of all e-commerce is done, you know, via Amazon. But when you scale that out to the world and you pull America out of that equation, it's less than 6% of all e-commerce, right? And so when you think about that and put that in terms of all the other industries probably represented on this call, if Amazon and e-commerce has 94%, you know, opportunity globally just by, you know, thinking about things differently and more digitally, apply that to your own business. If Amazon has 94%, everybody on this call probably has 94%, you know, at least that kind of percent of growth in all these areas. So we haven't missed the boat, I guess is the term. We're very nascent.
Excellent perspective, Ryan. And I think, you know, the interesting thing is we have a relatively myopic view of our world as we see things with respect to our current business scenario. I think if we look at it from a perspective, like you said, you know, if there is the scale of opportunity that exists is not just 1:2 or 1:5, it's more than 1:10. When it's in, you're saying if a company which we consider today as probably the largest internet company today is Amazon, and, you know, the largest company, a digital company that is a sort of role model for digitalization, has 1:10 growth potential even now, then you can imagine the rest who are still catching up with the digital journey have even higher level of scale, a potential scale. But let's bring it down to an organization level and say, you know, we are all human beings and we are part of our current reality in terms of organizations. What does an organization gain? Can we put some specific measurable outcomes that we can get out of adoption of a digital transformation journey?
Yeah, so you know, really, it's interesting because digital transformation. If you had asked me this 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I would say, you know, as technologists, we had to really push for digital transformation. And, you know, a lot of times that pushing, it was a little bit of the, you know, the tail wagging the dog is the term, right? You know, we had options and we had choices. And, you know, it's really starting to become less of a decision point and more of a survival skill. You know, if you look at, you know, Q1 of this last year, COVID has done some truly horrible things. You know, but some of the interesting things that you've seen came out of that is businesses that were ready to shift their business model. And by being prepared for digital, we're able to, you know, immediately, you noticed on streaming channels, you know, businesses pivoting and the commercials all started to change. And they were all these companies that were ready to make that shift. And so, you know, I think, you know, everybody's going to have to define their own burning case for change within their organization. But really, the most common things that I see when I'm engaged with companies, even before COVID and before all the craziness, was, acceleration, the ability to go fast, scalability, and not just scalability from a software perspective, but reach. It's a little bit what we talked about earlier. And then streamlining existing business processes, right? All these legacy systems are, because of merger and acquisition and things like that, being able to acquire and scale your business and easily have these things come along and play. Those are all huge benefits.
Well, it seems like, I think there is not too much of debate about the fact that everybody has to go through the digital journey. I think we are past that stage now where it's just, it's not merely a question of saying we don't need to convince anyone. I think the big question is, how do we go ahead? And, are there any, I think even from a perspective of saying, whenever you're undertaken a large program like this, people like us who are on the feet, on the ground, we first see all the challenges.
Right.
Before we, the benefits seem so far away and abstract to say, there are so many things to be able to cover before we get even the first initiative moving, that it seems like there are just too many things to do. And can we actually try to, concisely represent what are the high level key challenges to digital transformation? Can we sort of group them and categorize them and say, these are the 3 or 4 big areas of challenges that we need to talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. And what's interesting is many organizations, as I've been involved with, almost everything that we'll talk about here, and we'll cover it more when we get into really risk mitigation, but at a high level, the companies that have done digital transformation well and have moved to a platform strategy well have thought about things holistically, starting too tactically and in an approach that's not holistic or not human-centered is a recipe for failure. It's too many times this ends up becoming an IT project, right? Rather than looking at it, from a standpoint of you're there as an organization to solve problems, right? You've got customers, you've got vendors, you've got employees that all have very real, tangible problems. And not being holistic in your thinking is the key killer. Not defining a clear platform strategy and then business models up front. How are you going to monetize it? What are the new go-to-market strategies? Is some of that platform thinking. Another really killer that I've seen, if everybody's familiar with McKinsey's 3 horizons, H1, H2, and H3, really it's about planning, right? Your H1 is your current core. H2 is like kind of extending on that current core. And then H3 is typically innovation or newer projects or disruptors, things that end up becoming disruptors. You can't run an H2 and an H3 project like an H1 project. And too many times it's sat across the table from folks that are looking at doing digital transformation or even new product development, and they're trying to run it like an H1 project. And it doesn't work the same way. It's fundamentally different. The last thing, and part of the topic for this is like not systemically addressing risk in near real time. And that means, you need to be very aware of the types of risks that you can encounter. You need to have the right seats at the table, and you need to be fundamentally looking at risk and not outpacing your spend and your burning calories toward efforts that are either failed or are going to require a pivot. There's 2 more that I just thought of that may still be, lack of sponsorship used to be a huge thing. I think we're seeing that go away because people are really starting to understand that it's a survival skill at this point, and they're looking at the winners and losers. And but it's imperative to have executive sponsorship, broad stakeholders. Lack of a shared vision is something that I think no matter what, it's not just these types of projects, but anything else. I've got a good friend and colleague that repeats over and over. Shared vision is hard to get and even harder to keep. You're going to feel like a little bit of a broken record dealing with digital transformation, telling the same story over and over and over to the same people. But it's again, that shared vision is hard to get and even harder to keep.
That's so true. I think, in some ways, the silver lining on COVID is that some of these have now become a matter of survival. And so, things like some of the challenges that we used to face earlier have now become almost redundant in terms of there's no option. So, however difficult it might seem, you still have to go ahead with it.
Yeah,
But
I think realistically, people are starting to have seen the scariest from a business perspective. And when you've seen the scariest, all the things that people are afraid of, a lot of change management and a lot of pivoting business models start to seem not as scary.
Absolutely, so true. So let's hone in on, you're saying that we need to create a holistic strategy for all the different initiatives. But the holistic is a very abstract term. Can we break it down and say what are the core components of such a holistic platform strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've talked about a lot of this already leading up till now at a high level. So I'm going to be kind of beating the drum a little bit. But again, it's not an IT problem, digital transformation. It's actually more of a human problem. So the organizations that do really well have a mix of product and UX organizations along with IT that really partner well. And so there's three key areas and then also three key roles. And I'll call these three key roles the three-legged stool is kind of our nickname term for it. But the three roles that are critical in my mind are product, design, which encompasses usability, and then technology. And there's a lot of reasons for that we can get into. But then the three key components are digital strategy, your platform thinking, and your design thinking. And so, again, I think we can talk a little bit more in depth on those if you'd like to kind of continue into that.
Yeah, I think we would like to focus more on the risks rather than the components of digital transformation. So we should probably go into covering what are the different areas of risk. I think in terms of design thinking, platform thinking, and the technology, largely these are in some ways details that can be sort of covered during the journey. But I think if we are aware of what are the areas of risk, I think that's the key focus area of today's discussion. And if we can talk about a little bit about what are the areas of risk and what are the strategies for mitigation of these risks. I think let's come to that topic as soon as possible so that we talk about the areas of risk management.
Great. Yeah, no, that makes sense. So I'll set the table a little bit, and then we can dive into those key areas of risk. So, like we talked about, your digital strategy is your long-term goal. Platform thinking enables the contextual brand experience at all of your touch points. And the design thinking is really, it's going to focus on your need, your customers, your employees, your partners, your vendors. And then that three-legged stool is about having the appropriate people as equally important perspectives and inputs to the digital transformation process. And they're all critical when we start talking about risk. And so I don't know if those on the call are familiar with Marty Kagan. Marty Kagan is a Silicon Valley product executive and author, wrote a book called Inspired, where he talks about the 4 big risks. And so we'll get immediately into the risk. Usability, it's just as simple as whether users can figure out how to use the products, right? So your new digital products, the new processes. Feasibility, whether or not engineers can actually build the vision that product kind of comes up with. Viability is whether the solution is going to work for all the different various aspects of the business. And then value, this is really owned by that group, or the three-legged stool. Product is a really typical driver for it. I see a lot of organizations put that under product, but value, just as simple as, are the customers going to buy it? Are they going to choose to use it over other products? And so when you think about those 4 key risks, if you're addressing those continually, and we can dive into a process about what it looks like to mitigate that risk. Those are the 4 key ones that you got to watch out for, and really successful platform strategies are keeping those front and center.
So you talked about usability as a sort of design risks. Can you give an example of what are the kind of risks that are associated with usability. Let's take a concrete example of saying, okay, what do we mean by usability risks? What could we have done wrong, and what should we not do?
So that is a great example. So usability, it really coupled with product as well. You should be building products that solve a problem for somebody. A lot of usability folks will use pain as a surrogate. Pain is one thing. There's also something called a tacit need, which is basically a need that somebody doesn't even realize that they have. And if you're not addressing and really understanding the people that are core to the problem and really, almost falling in love with the problem, then you're likely creating things as a business, regardless of if it's tech, a digital transformation project or any project, you're likely building something that's going to fail. And you see startups do that all the time. It's why, you'll get 1 to 2 years and not be able to monetize a lot of startups. And, at the end of the day, what that means is they pivot or they die. And so wouldn't it be better if early on you had a process that you could, get something minimal to market? You started with user needs. You validated that you were able to actually fill those needs, and where you couldn't, your pivot was only ever a few months out of where it needs to be. One, you're spending less money, less time, burning less calories, and you're getting to the problem quicker. And so it's all about iteration in my mind, and being able to rapidly, translate and move.
So Ryan, regarding usability and design, I think there's a big, of course, well understood misconception about design from a perspective of, the classic design brief is make our website look better or make our mobile app look better and so on, right? The look better, work better are the sort of myopic objectives that can increase the risk as far as usability is concerned. I mean, typically we have seen several projects considered technically successful, but from a business-wise, big failures that didn't really achieve any major business results, largely because we had a myopic perspective on design from a usability perspective. Do you think, I think one question that as usability is concerned is the inside out versus outside in perspective of design. Typically all of us who have business and we are running our businesses have an inside out view of what are the needs of our users, right? I think the challenge and the risk in moving with our deep rooted assumptions about what our users need is that we are going to do the same thing again. So how do you take advantage of, and how do you really bring this outside in perspective where we try to question our assumptions about our users and our strongly believed assumptions about what our users need? So how do you tackle that? Because that seems to be like saying get out of your mind and think from outside, and that's not really going to be easy for anyone.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I'm not a product guy, but I've worked closely in a lot of innovation labs and things like that, and so I can talk like a product guy. The things that work the best are like I said, really throwing out what you think getting in there's things they call follow me to the offices and things like that. And I've seen the most success in this kind of a process, really rethinking things again, getting in with your consumer, whoever it is. Internal people can be your consumer as well, right? Understanding their problems, understand what their life's going, what's going to make their life better. Believe it or not, there are some ways now with artificial intelligence, if you want to start from a technology aspect, to get better learnings quicker and to leverage those. But the human has to be at the center of the problem, and that human is your customer. And so at the end of the day, if we talk process a little bit, in my mind, you want to use some sort of gated innovation process where you've got very, set timelines where you're trying to answer questions. A lot of those are going to be about product, and they're going to all be, in the framing that we talked about: feasibility, viability, value, usability. And, everything is a hypothesis that you're testing. And like I mentioned, you can use data, you can use AI, you can use insights from the actual customer that are as simple as standing over their shoulder and watching them use your apps. But gating that process, and you want to make sure you're not ever outpacing your investment, with what's appropriate at any given time. And that, really the only way to do that is to be very rigid in the way you approach it and very pragmatic.
Perfect. What about what about the technical risks? Because typically what happens is, like you said, digital transformation is the first candidate who's passed on the baton for digital transformation is technology and IT. And how do you see the big risks about, as far as the feasibility of the technology is concerned? What are the kind of risks associated with technology, and how do you overcome those risks?
Yeah, I've got a couple thoughts here. I know we talked a lot about process. We talked a lot about human-centered. We talked a lot about design and product, but it's as a technologist, it's an incredibly exciting time, right? And the really great thing for us, a lot of the major problems have been solved, right? I look for consolidation when I look to start a project. Kubernetes is eating the world. Serverless is eating the world. These things that have already really, it almost doesn't matter what cloud you pick. You can, pick serverless solutions to do things like microservices. Event-driven architecture is starting to become, really well known and more easily implementable with service messages or, service meshes and things like Istio, and identity and access management is starting to become very commoditized and really easily available. So it's just from a technologist perspective, it's looking for consolidation in those areas and innovating in partnership with your product and UX folks, because a lot of the technology is simply there.
Yeah, I want to do a bit of a shameless plug here, Ryan, and Accion has, we of course noticed that there is a lot of convergence of technologies, best practices, architectural best practices, and I think over the last 4 to 5 years, we have made sure that we invested proactively in making sure that we don't have to repeat ourselves when we build digital platforms for customers. And what we have done is we have ended up creating a platform which we call as Breeze, which is basically a collation of all the best practices that we have used for digital platform building across multiple customers. And of course, some of your thoughts have gone into building part of Breeze as well. So thank you again for that. And I also want to mention that all of Breeze is agnostic of the cloud platform that we use. And so it can be either on-premise or on cloud. And I think the risk mitigation that we have seen by using Breeze versus not using Breeze is not only in terms of pre-built components, but also architectural decisions. We have seen a lot of customers who have begun their journeys, and we have sort of got involved not early enough, and many decisions have been taken more on the basis of gut feel, individual comfort level with certain technologies or certain I have read somewhere that Netflix does it this way, right? And we have customers who ask questions about what is CQRS? What's the role of CQRS, right? How do you take care of event sourcing? And what happens is we have seen that these keywords that our industry is so good at inventing these new keywords that it makes our job as technologists and architects really difficult to sieve through all of these keywords and really hone in on what does it actually mean? How do you actually put it together? And thankfully with Breeze, a lot of these risks can be mitigated because you can cut through the hype and actually see the code and see what to do about it. So Just want to do a bit of a shameless plug there.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, definitely. No, in solutions like Breeze, where a lot of technology has been solved for sure, and you look for consolidation anytime. I have something I like to call core versus context, and you have to understand what is core to your business, what are core to the things that you're doing, and what do you want to partner for from a context perspective. And those are going to be things that aren't really providing distinct value or DVP to your organization, right? And so getting really good at understanding that core versus context, even from an engineering perspective. And engineers love to build. I mean, I'm an engineer. I love to build, but I have to know when it makes sense for me to pull something off of a shelf and use it. And so, that consolidation helps in that regard. And in solutions like Breeze are almost like a blueprint, which is incredibly helpful. I would think, the one last thing that I would say is, as far as, technological, kind of hurdles that that you need to get around are just being, pragmatic when you've got, or that understanding where to build, buy, and partner. And so I think, that is a key critical area to kind of watch out for from a risk perspective.
Absolutely. I think the other thing that I would like to point out is that the good news is that there are a lot of people, enough people today who have already tried out many of these, right? And not only is there conversions in beliefs of best practices, architectural best practices, as well as technologies, but I think there is a lot of convergence about of experience as well. I think we have really been fortunate to have been in this space for the last 6 to 7 years. In the last almost 9 years now of our existence, the last 6 years we have spent in helping customers with their digital transformation journeys, and we have seen a lot of benefit in actually a community-based approach for design. If you look at the best practices of Breeze, they're not based on our beliefs. They're based on the beliefs of customers that we have worked with, such as you, and we have learned from people. I would say at least 50 different architects and chief technology officers have contributed to the beliefs that we have put together in something like Breeze. And the ability for us to actually validate our design beliefs and decisions with respect to a community like this, which has collaboratively created a standard of this kind, can really be a big help. Is there and is there any sort of body of such a community that has that you are aware of, or that you're part of, where there is a process of validation? I know as an organization, we do have these capabilities. I don't want this to be a sales webinar, but in general, where do you go to validate your digital transformation journey and plan to say, these are the risks we understand, and we have got some ideas about how to cover these, but do we really do it this way or not? Is that a well understood process, or it's basically you have to rely on hopefully smart people like us and say, we think we know and we can help you?
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, that's a great question. I can't think of a single governing body. There's various groups depending on, whether you're looking at things like identity and access management and some of those things that can get a little bit more rote, or, there's some bodies around that. Security, it's still a little bit of the Wild West. I think the consolidation has helped from an engineering perspective, again, to be able to really lean on problems that have been solved. And so for most of those, you can be fairly confident, but it's a lot for any technologist at the beginning of a digital transformation process to look at things like their legacy infrastructure, their legacy architecture. How do you get those things to play? It's a little bit different when you're creating something that I would consider greenfield or net new. And so the risk with those can definitely be higher. And so, you need to look for solutions to those sorts of things, and validation can absolutely be difficult to get, at least from a single source, for sure.
Absolutely. Ryan, I want to ask a sort of negative risk question.
Okay.
I'll explain what I mean. Typically, when I've talked to senior architects and technology leaders in many of our customer organizations, there is a preconceived notion of what is a risk, right? And I've often had people ask, for example, which is better to use? Is it React or Angular, right? Or which cloud platform is better? Should we go to AWS or Azure or GCP? This seems like a life-threatening decision. I mean, what if we make a mistake?
Right.
Right. And I want you to throw some light on, either validating this, assumption that yes, these are life-threatening decisions. If you make a wrong decision today, you've had it, and your whole digital journey may just collapse.
Right.
If you choose the wrong platform or the wrong technology. What is this really a real risk, or is it just a perceived risk and we don't have to worry too much about it?
So I had notes to talk about big bang projects and some of those sorts of things, and honestly, in my experience with this, the majority of times those are not end of the world decisions. And in fact, if you're architecting your program appropriately and your engineers are working along with it appropriately, your core needs to be your platform strategy, your platform thinking, all of these things that are immutable regardless of technology, right? You're going to have some sort of service bus in a microservices architecture. You're going to treat certain things as your core, and everything else need to be built to change. If you take one thing away, I think, from this is a key risk around technology. You have to build the change. And you have to, as architects that are working in alignment with, designers and product folks, really be protective of your core. There are certain things that are core and are very big deals. But you should be building things flexibly and in such a way that you can plug and play different architectures as, technology, especially when you talk about things like UI, like, React or Angular, or any of these other JavaScript technologies, or even the microservices and all those sorts of things. It's a fickle world, and, and things change and evolve, and they should be able to plug and play and work along, to where you don't have to feel so hand-tied. The best advice I can give you is if you can lay out your strategy and then allow your teams to be autonomous as long as they play within the guidelines, and be very stringent about what those guidelines are, and have some sort of a process to check and mitigate risk constantly around all the things that we talked about: usability, feasibility, viability, value. If you're doing that on a regular basis, you're going to know when somebody's violated a big thing, and you're going to catch it. And you shouldn't ever be more than a couple of weeks out of touch with that. We don't have months anymore like we used to pivot or to think about things or not change. The big message in my mind, the biggest risk for you is to not do something. Dive in, start doing it, have some fundamentals, and everything else can be a little bit more contextual.
That's such a great point, Ryan. In fact, I think last year in our innovation summit, we had an analyst tell us, I think that was 2 years back, he told us, anything you build today, assume that the shelf life is less than 2 years. Any piece of code you write today, you have to rewrite in 2 years. And that was like, I thought I knew that, but when he told me that, it's 2 years, I said, really? Is it as short as that? Because sometimes today we assume that big projects are multi-year projects. And how do you make your platform strategy in such a way that everything you build at any point in your overall digital transformation journey, which could potentially be 2-year journey, right? And by the time you finish the journey, you're like, reinventing everything you did. And that seems like an infeasible plan of action in some ways.
Right. Yeah. If
go ahead.
you build things appropriately, to your point, you should be able to be in a continual state of change. And that's fine. In fact, it's perfect, because the most dreaded thing I think anybody on the call I think could think about that are involved in IT or technology projects is that, you know, you have to re-platform, right? It's you know, we've had people talking about, you know, you have to stop and redo things, and we all know that's not feasible. So building the change is the really only solution to that at the end of the day. And so putting yourself in a position to be able to do that easily and atomically is critical. So how are we looking on time? I want to make sure we have time for questions. Ash, did we lose audio or? Oh, it looks like Ash may be muted.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't have permission to unmute myself. I muted because I coughed and then I couldn't unmute myself. Apologies. Yeah, I think this is a good time for us to really ask some questions, and I'm hoping that people would have some questions of their own. And I would invite everybody to please post their questions if you have any. If not, we are happy to continue this discussion, and I certainly have more questions for Ryan. So if anybody else has any questions, please do post them, and you know, we can take some of these questions as we speak. Tony, to the best of my knowledge, I don't think there are any questions posted as yet. I don't see any open questions as yet. So maybe, Ryan, I can continue my questions to you while other people think of additional questions that they can pose, if that's okay.
Yeah, that'd be great. And just for the group, if anybody, you know, even if you don't have specifically pointed ones, it'd be interesting to know. We can talk more technical. We can talk more process and risk reduction. Either. So if anybody has any preferences around that, you know, please let us know. But yeah, Ash, definitely continue.
Right. There's a great question.
Hey, Ash. Here, I
Yes.
see one here. It's basically around the lines of.
Yeah, I can see the question, Tony. If you don't mind, I'll just pose that question. So there is a question from, I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name, Alana Steffens. The question is, what is a platform? Are we talking about one technology, or are there several technologies cobbled together to form a platform? And you know, I really wanted to ask this question to you, Ryan, because platform is a word that is very abstract. You know, it's every technology is called a platform, right?
Right.
And so this is a natural question to ask, really. And if you can help define what is the meaning of an overall platform strategy.
Yeah, no, that's such a good one. So really, and I'm a tough one to ask on this, because I think of platforms. So really, when you think about platform, if the distinct value in your company is to be a platform company, meaning you want to be able to leverage things like network effects, allowing other people to contribute to what you're doing, to be able to plug into APIs, to be able to create things that are, the awesome transition for me as a technologist is when my board of directors at company.com realized the platform is the product. And I didn't have to sell it. I didn't have to say it. They just realized it. And it shifted the way we thought about doing business. People now will leverage our platform instead of leveraging products or services or goods that we do. It's the platform is the product. And so there's two ways to think about it. If you have a business or an enterprise where you're going to leverage network effects and have people, leverage a lot of the same code bases or APIs that your own engineers do, and you're essentially platformizing. A lot of the big ones that you can think about are people like Salesforce, and you don't have to be out to that level to consider yourself a platform. You can be a platform that's more internal, and in that case, you're not marketing yourself as a platform, but you're building a platform internally, and it's to do all those things, to drive scalability, to drive time to market. They should all be about, first and foremost, reducing friction inside your business, allowing you to have an almost unfair advantage to get to market over your competitors. That's building a platform internally. Seeing yourself as a platform is how you go to market. And that's a real decision of your business. So hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, There are a couple of more questions coming along the way, but I just want to throw a little bit of specificity in that answer, in the sense that, you know, the platform is not a technology first and foremost. I think the platform is a perspective of how to define the capabilities of your organization. I think the most crucial recognition is a digital transformation is reinventing your business as a technology, you know. And so the method that you expose your core business capabilities in the form of potentially an API or some way in which you are able to have third parties who are your partners, your customers, access your business without you as a human being being involved in that, is the platform. So the platform is the exposure of your core business capabilities to the rest of the world in the form of non-human or automated mechanisms to access your core business capabilities, is the platform. Now, you know, the more capabilities you can build into your platform that define your business, the more digital you are.
Well, yeah, and I'll layer on there just a little bit. You know, one of the big benefits is if you platformize internally, if you never intend to sell it to somebody else or call yourselves a platform, your product teams should be able to use tools that are already built, internal mechanisms to more rapidly create things. And so in my mind, that is also the power of a platform. It is multiple technologies under the hood, almost always. It's almost never a turnkey platform. It's solutions that your product teams can create to rapidly produce products and solve need at the end of the day.
Perfect. I think Russell, there's another question from Russell in terms of what's the difference between a regular platform and a multi-tenant platform. And I think this is, again, a very common question that people have in, you know, in terms of multi-tenancy, as in, you know, first maybe, Ryan, you can define multi-tenancy, and then maybe you answer that question in terms of what's the difference between a regular and a multi-tenant platform.
Absolutely. So multi-tenancy is the ability for all of your partners or clients or customers to leverage the same exact code base. And, you know, a lot of times the same data stores and everything. And obviously you can do segmentation at certain layers, but the key idea is that everybody that access the platform, regardless of how customized you can make it for that audience, are on the same code base and are living within the same tenant. So multi-tenancy is multiple people, you know, living in the same house, essentially.
Right. And in terms of, you know, does that really apply in terms of, it does apply, right? If you are basically trying to create a platform that exposes your business capabilities, core business capabilities, you ideally need to have multiple people use it. You know, you can't build a platform for a customer or a partner. You will need to think about everybody using the same platform. So multi-tenancy is a definition that was applied to technology platforms, specific technology platforms. But I think as a business platform, multi-tenancy is a given because technically you are a business that deals with multiple customers, and therefore multiple tenants or multiple users would certainly need to use it. Having said that, multi-tenancies has another facet or aspect that is commonly defined, and that is for SaaS platforms. You know, when you're building a platform that is used by different businesses such that the data is independent of each other and they are isolated from each other, they have to be isolated either from a compliance perspective or a privacy or a security perspective. In those situations, you know, the data has to be multi-tenant in the sense that, you know, you have to isolate the data from one tenant to the other. But that's more in the context of, you know, if the platform is provided as a service to third parties. If the platform is your platform that you are exposing to your customers to use directly, you know, to interact with you, that's a slightly different perspective of a platform. In that case, you know, by definition, it does have to be multi-tenant, but it need not necessarily have the same level of compliance isolation between tenants. Because, so that's just a minor detail, but we can talk more about this, we are going to be reaching out to you and offering to have more private and one-on-one discussions, so we can certainly take this up.
So,
I want to move to another question, Ryan, if you don't mind, which is...
Really quick, I got two over here, and one's been up for a while, and so you mind if I raise this question, because I think it's a really good one. There's actually two over here, and maybe you were going to hit the same ones, but Richard Herman, it's been up for a bit, asked, what does a transformation journey look like while doing business as usual? Building code for 2 years and reinventing it seems unrealistic if it's throwaway. Presume it's more refining bits and parts to align with new realities. So here's the way I look and think about this. And this is a really important part I didn't hit earlier in the discussion. As technologists, when you take on digital transformation, your goal needs to be that nothing's ever a 2-year, monolithic build. The reality is a lot of things that we've worked on, in these organizations have been 2, 3, 10, 15-year builds. And so my strong advice for people getting into digital transformation is that you look to drive immediate value. Organize your platform strategy, start to understand what your business use cases look like for digital, but pick one place to start that you can drive immediate value, and look to use that as a proving ground of the technology, of the business model, of how that works, and set that up in a way that you can iterate on it, and that you can adopt a more lightweight approach. In my mind, you need to adopt or at least train, and for most organizations, you need to be able to release your microservices and some of those small parts of functionality almost ad hoc, whether it's daily or every 2 weeks. You need to be in a position that when there's value, you release it. And so what that mindset does is if you can start small and show value and then continue to move on and build, it may take you a couple of years, but you'll have transformed over time. There's no way, well, that is the way that you change the tire on a moving car. Pick someplace small, you stand up your platform, you start with the someplace small, and you start plugging things as you see opportunity. It's going to be a little bit hard in the beginning because you're going to have to figure out ways for some of your legacy stuff to play along. But it's worth it, and it's really the only way to change the tire on a moving car.
Brilliant. That's such an important thing, in terms of defining the iterative model is actually a non-trivial and difficult to comprehend if most legacy organizations have project mindsets, right? It's like a bounded project, and then you say, okay, let's create a set of digital projects and then execute these as projects. I think that's very different from a mindset which says, which is traditionally attributed to startups. So you say, let's just start because we don't have the resources.
No,
right?
Definitely.
I think forcing yourself to think like that, in the sense that everything you need to do has to be provable as soon as possible, and you don't have to get everything right, is a mindset that startups have just because they can't have anything else. They don't have anything else. But as a mature organization, you have to force yourself to allow such iterations to happen. And that's a very, very difficult decision at an enterprise level, but certainly makes a big difference in tackling that risk.
So hey, Ash, I got one more question that I would love to answer, unless you've got one that's been around for a while.
No, I'm going to get to Greg's question next, and if you can.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's where I was going.
Please.
All right. So Greg asked, and I really like this question: what's the best way to share and disseminate understanding of a customer's problem to a distributed team that didn't have the benefit of looking over the customer's shoulder, in order to make sure that the technical team fully understand the problem as they're developing toward a common goal? So here's my best advice on that. Your UX team and your product team are going to should have the benefit of the follow me to the offices, or some sort of contextual inquiry or interviews or things like that. These days, you're going to be doing all that via Zoom. What you're going to do, or what you should be doing, is, before you have all the evidence, is creating something called proto-personas. Those are your best guess at who your audiences are for things. And you're going to give them names, and you're going to give them attributes, and they're going to have a demographic from an age perspective, and you're going to have a backstory on them. as you start to interview people, your UX and your product folks are going to flesh out those like archetypes or those personas, and they'll go from a proto persona to an actual persona. And what I would advise on that is that you get your UX folks to work with your product teams close enough to where they get to know those personas. And when you're doing story grooming and epic, creating your epics, you're going to view those, and you should be having discussions about the stories that are being, created and played in the framing of your personas. And, if you're doing it right, you're going to have your team, several sprints in asking, well, what would Joe think about that? Joe's not really great at mobile. He's a, 45-year-old, mechanic in, middle America. And, so he's on his phone, but not incredibly often. And he's just trying to get back to work. And he really doesn't use internet at his house a whole lot, except for streaming movies. You can, once you get your team talking in those terms and understanding the persona, as long as you've backed that up with qualitative and quantitative data around your actual people, it's a game changer.
Brilliant. Thank you. I hope, Greg, we answered your question. There's a last question from Joe McCoy, and I think we are pretty much up in terms of time. But I just wanted to quickly touch upon that. What experience does Accion have with helping companies in digital transformation? Can you give a real life example? And I just want to make a one sentence answer to that. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. But the typical question, and I think the big questions that we get in terms of customers wanting to get into the digital journey is not exactly knowing which initiative to start with, right? And I think one of the benefits that we have had, especially because we have helped so many different customers in different industries go through this journey, is to actually plan that roadmap of what should be done first and what can be done first and what can be done later. As a real life example, I think one of the most complex digital transformation journeys we have done is for utilities. I think utilities in particular are challenging because they have so many dependencies in the journey from their product to the customer. So many intermediaries. There is a whole supply chain which is even more complex than retail in terms of being able to deliver that. There is a very complex set of integrations required to be able to do a digital transformation journey. And I've done several others in many other industries, but I think the biggest challenge is dealing with multiple moving parts that have to be integrated into a platform. And I think that is one area where I think we are.
And so Bill was with ABB when I met him. Bill.
Well, hey, if that's wrapping it up, is that about it?
I think there was somebody trying to ask a question verbally by voice or something. I was hearing something, but yeah, otherwise we are pretty much done. We are happy to have more private discussions around this topic for anyone that's interested, and we'll send an email to that effect.
Okay, sounds good. We'll send a note out to anybody who needs further info. And thanks everybody for joining us today and taking the time out of your Wednesday afternoon to listen to this great discussion. Really appreciate everybody's time.
Thank you.
Bye now.
All right, thanks everyone.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks so much, Ryan.
Absolutely.
Bye, Ash. Bye-bye now.
See you guys.